Hello and welcome to today's lesson. We are in Learning Zone 3, Topic 2, Physical and Psychological Demands of Sport. And today we're going to look at nutrition and hydration. So by the end of this lesson, you will know the difference between micronutrients and macronutrients, as well as a couple of examples and the uses of them. You'll then know how to structure, or how a performer and a coach can structure nutrition before, during, and after performance to promote optimal performance and optimal recovery. And then lastly, we are going to look at water. What role does hydration play in sport performance, and the downsides of dehydration, and how sport drinks could be used to support performance in the absence of water, or maybe not in the absence, but in combination with water. So we're going to start off with macro and micronutrients. And as you can see from the right-hand side picture there, we've got carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. Now, the term macronutrient is given to the food groups or the food stuff which gives the most calories. It's energy dense. It provides the body with the fuel sources, with the energy for it to move and complete its bodily functions, be it the organ systems, blood cell reproduction, muscle contractions, whatever it might be. So for the calories that we need on a day-to-day basis, so for yourselves, it's probably around the 1500 calorie mark, kilocalorie mark. You would get those from macronutrients in a blend of carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. Now, the other consumable food stuff are classified as micronutrients. So we've got this very broad split, macro and micro. Macro gives us energy. Micronutrients, they're not energy dense, but what they do is support and allow the chemical reactions that can release the energy from macronutrients to actually occur. So with an imbalance, or if we only had one group and not the other, or an unbalanced diet, then bodily systems won't function as well, because we won't have the vitamins and minerals that we require to access the energy from the macronutrients. So it's important that we get this blend. And fiber, as you can see down at the bottom there, for today we are going to put it in the micronutrient category, but it's the one that bridges the two, which we'll talk a little bit more about later on, and you'll see why then. So first off, big difference: macro and micro. Macronutrients, which are referred to as macros from now on, gives us energy, and micros, vitamins, minerals, fiber, they allow the reactions to take place. They support the functions in the body. So carbohydrates, from the start off there, what is the role of a carbohydrate? Well, these are the most accessible form of energy. They're not the most energy packed, but they're the macronutrient, or the macros that can actually give us energy quickly. So in sport, in recovery, when we need quick access to fuel, to actually allow bodily systems to occur, carbohydrates are the go-to. They're the easiest thing to break apart, to release energy, to fuel the body on its daily activities. And they should equate for about 30 to 50% of our intake. So from a balanced diet, if we take 2,000 calories as a bog standard guideline, then about 30 to 50%, or about 600 to 1,000 calories, should be got from carbohydrates. Now, carbohydrates, the way I sort of refer to them is, imagine it like a big 1 kilo or a big bar of Cadbury's. Okay, not necessarily the chocolate side of things, but the size, the amount of components it has. That's got about 15 strips of 5 or 6 blocks in a line. So then in the whole thing, we've probably got about 50 separate chunks. Now that's one big carbohydrate, and we're not likely to eat or transport this whole bar in one go. What we would do is break it apart when we snap a bit off to then eat, or to share, or whatever we might do. Well, that carbohydrate is split into its lines, and a line is what we refer to as glycogen. So glycogen is a smaller part, or it's a segment of a big carbohydrate compound. Okay, so carbohydrates are big, glycogen are smaller. They're forms of carbohydrate. So we could probably get multiple glycogen molecules from one big carbohydrate. Then a glucose, which we'll talk about shortly, is then one square of a glycogen line. So a glucose is an even smaller part of glycogen, which is a smaller part of carbohydrate. Now we'll talk a little bit more about glucose and glycogen later on, particularly with sport drinks, as you can see this cyclist here drinking from. But just have those three words in mind: carbohydrates, glycogen, glucose. They're all very quickly accessible forms of energy, and they're distributed around the body via the bloodstream. So some different foods that we can get carbohydrates from, we've got that picture there. So bananas, oats, grains, pasta. They're the better forms, so you could say. There isn't necessarily a good or bad carbohydrate, but in terms of the value that it provides, we can get more from those sorts of carbohydrates. So breads, grains, rices, pastas, potato, starchy foods. And then that's what I was just talking about there. So we've got complex and simple, not necessarily good and bad. They're good for different scenarios and bad in different scenarios as well, but two categories of carbohydrates, which we're going to look at now. So complex carbohydrates, the first one. You can see from the picture here that we've got this split of energy providing foods. And in the top, we've got potato, vegetables, banana, oats, fruit, leaves, bread. And at the bottom, we've got synthetic, man-made, donuts, sweets, Coca-Cola, cookies, chocolate, chips, things like that. Now, complex carbohydrate are exactly that. If we were to look at their chemical structure, they're just a little bit more complex than simple carbohydrates. There's more stacked within them. They're just more complicated. They've got extras, such as vitamins, such as fiber, such as minerals. There's normally some fat and water content in there as well. They're not solely glycogen or glucose, all stuck together in a bundle. Okay, there's more things within it. Now, the good thing about that is if we eat complex carbohydrates, it takes longer to break them down and release the energy that's actually stored within them. So if we do eat complex carbohydrates for sport performance, our body accesses the energy inside of them. It almost drip feeds it into the blood for a longer period of time. So we don't get this sudden spike of energy and then it's gone again. We gradually access it and we keep on accessing the energy for a long sustained period of time. Excellent for moderate intensity exercise lasting longer than 10 minutes. Now we've got hours of glycogen inside of the body that we can access if it's complex. It takes longer to break down, it takes longer to access, we can get energy from it for longer. Some downsides. Just look at that top point there. We've got a lower amount of kilocalories, so a lower amount of energy per 100 grams, compared to simple carbs or simple carbohydrates, which we'll look at next slide. So even though they can last longer, the overall quantity of energy that we can extract from them is a little bit lower because they bring with it these extras. But the extras are good because we need fiber, we need vitamins, we need these microbes. It's good to have a blend of fat and protein and carbohydrates. It leads to a more balanced lifestyle, a more balanced diet. But it does mean we don't get this spike of energy which we can use straight away to fuel high intensity activity. We do get it for longer. So there's the examples up at the top in that green box: nuts and seeds, pasta and rice, fruit and veg. So complex carbs, great for the day before sport, which we'll talk about in a moment as well. So the opposite, simple carbohydrates, they're the ones at the bottom of this picture. So these are typically synthesized, they're man-made. We've produced these, we've broken down other foods, other chemical structures, other complex carbohydrates, and we've broken away the glycogen and the glucose, and then we've stuck those small parts together. So there's very there's very few extras. There's very few micronutrients in simple carbohydrates. But what we do have is a lot of energy. We've got pure glucose in some situations. Think of sugar, just a sugary sweet such as, I think there are wine gums there, or jelly beans, or the Coca-Cola where, if you were to, I think there's an experiment where if you were to boil off the water that's actually in Coca-Cola, you get this syrup left behind. Now that's just dense glucose and quickly accessible energy. So we get a lot more energy per 100 grams compared to complex carbohydrates. But we don't get the benefits. We don't get the vitamins, the minerals, we don't get the fiber. We don't get all of those supporting nutrients that allow us to put the glucose to good use. How do we get them? Fizzy drinks, sweets, ice cream. Anything brightly coloured, which isn't natural, like a fruit or a vegetable. But they do have their use in sport, and we are going to cover this later on in this lesson. But they do have, don't think of them as these bad things. At the end of the day, they are just chemical structures which we ingest, and they serve a purpose. And that purpose is lots of energy accessible really quickly. So try and think of a time where you need energy really quickly. And that's where simple carbs can come in. Next, macronutrient. So we've done carbohydrates, simple, complex, fats. Now, fats contain the most energy per 100 grams, even more so than the complex carbohydrates. Now, it's energy dense, very dense. The difficulty with fat, though, is that it's hard to access the energy inside of it without loads of spare oxygen running around our body. So at the moment, I'm standing up, I'm moving a little bit, I'm breathing, my muscles aren't really working too hard, I've got a surplus of oxygen. So right now, my body is probably in a prime state, low intensity, surplus oxygen, it's accessing energy from my fat stores. Now, if I was to suddenly go out for a run, or you were to suddenly stand up and start doing star jumps, that's high intensity. Suddenly you haven't got that surplus of oxygen. So you need energy from elsewhere. You need energy from carbohydrates. So at low intensity, where we've got lots of oxygen, we can access so much energy from minimal fat stores. Now, fat's almost given this bad reputation, but we need it. We can't have a balanced diet without it. And some of the benefits are here, that third point down. Fats act as this storage system for vitamins and minerals. So as we consume fruits and veg and a wide variety of food stuff, the vitamins and minerals that are contained within there, those important micronutrients, rather than them coming in and then passing straight through our body, they can dissolve into our fat stores. So then when our body does need them to enable certain bodily reactions or chemical reactions, they can retrieve the vitamins and minerals from the fat stores and then put them to use. Now, fat, yes, it has benefits, but too much is obviously going to be a bad thing because it can start to restrict movement. It can start to fill up the fat cells to the point where, around joints, we can't actually exercise the complete full range of movement. Too much fat in the body and the fat cells start to fill up to such an extent that any spare energy that we consume and we don't expend through movement can't get stored in the fat cells because they're filled up, or it's difficult to find a space to fit it into. It stays in the bloodstream and we start to have this energy or this glycogen, this fat, circulating in our bloodstream, thickening it, increasing our blood pressure. It's got nowhere to get off. It's like a traffic jam. If all the junctions are blocked off, cars just stay on the road and it gets busier and busier and busier. It's more tension, there's more pressure, more things can go wrong. But like with carbohydrates, fats, they come in different forms, and the broad categories are unsaturated and saturated. Now, saturated, these are easier to use in the body. So the word saturated basically means whether or not, with the hydrogen, the carbon, the oxygen, molecules that make up a fat compound. An unsaturated fat is when you've got hydrogen molecules or carbon molecules that are just about hanging on to the whole compound. They're only attached by a thread, so at one place. Whereas saturated fats are when the makeup of the compound means that all of the different elements, all of the hydrogen, the carbon, the oxygen, all of the elements are locked in. So it's structured in a way that there isn't a part that can be broken off really easily. It's almost like a solid chunk. So imagine at room temperature, which is a good gauge for it, you might have olive oil. Okay, that's an unsaturated fat. And it's a lot more fluid, it's more malleable. Whereas a saturated fat, such as butter, is solid at room temperature. Its structure is more compact and hard. So unsaturated fats, they're easier to access, they're easier to digest, easier to break down. Now, the parts of it which are just attached at one point of its makeup, they can be broken down, which releases energy, and we can use that to move. Whereas saturated fats, if everything's locked in, it takes more time, more chemical process, more oxygen to actually break apart that fat molecule to get any sort of energy out of. So given the two, or given glycogen and a difficult saturated fat, which one is the body going to use? The easy one or the hard one? Path of least resistance. It's going to use the one that's easier. So saturated fats, they can stick in our body for longer. They're difficult to access, difficult to draw energy from, which can lead to the issues I was talking about at the start. Greater fat retention. It can stay in the blood for longer. We can't use it for energy as well. And lastly, we have proteins, carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. Now, protein, they're referred to as the building blocks. These repair our cells, repair our muscles. They help us grow. Now, it's also a source of energy, but it requires even more oxygen to break down protein than it does fat, and a lot more to break down carbohydrate. So in terms of a priority, protein is way down on the list for the body to use. We don't like using it. So we go through the carbohydrates at moderate to high intensity. We go through the fats if we run out of glycogen after 2 or 3 hours of sustained exercise. And then after that, if we run out of fat stores, we might have to start to access some of the protein, or a blend of the two. Now, protein itself, it's this chain of 20 what's called amino acids. So a protein is like a chain link of separate, sort of standalone nutrients or chemicals. And there's 20 of them, or 20 main ones, and 20 which form a complete chain. And they're called branched chain amino acids, or BCAAs. Now, of these 20, there's 8 that are essential. Sorry, 9. 9 of which that are essential. Now, these essential amino acids have to be consumed from food because our body can't create them inside. Whereas the other 11, they can be. We can synthesize and make 11 of the overall 20 as long as we've consumed enough of the 9 essential ones. And we get those from food. We get those from fruit, our veg, our fibers, our carbohydrates, our fats, our fish, our meat, whatever it might be. We get those amino acids in. As long as we get those 9, even better if we can get some of the 11 as well. But then with those 9, our body can get to work and it can create the other 11 from the 9 that we've eaten and produce a complete protein chain. 20 amino acids lined up. And that's going to be the most effective at repairing cells, repairing our muscles, contributing to the growth and restoration of our damaged tissue. Now, in terms of recommendation, it's down here at the bottom in that blue box. Roughly, 2 per kilo. About 2 per kilo. That's sort of your performance level. Definitely above 1 per half kilo. But obviously the increasing amount of protein that you do consume then is going to aid more muscle growth. But if you've got spare and surplus, then that's going to put a strain onto your digestion system and dealing with it inside the body. So just eating lots of protein isn't going to actually benefit a performer unless they've damaged their body to start with. So protein, it goes towards that rebuilding, that restructuring of the body. Some common foods: meats, fish, milk, nuts, legumes, tuna, eggs, and it's a common supplement as well. So you can buy whey protein, for example, which is sort of a component that's been isolated from milk, put into powdered form, add some water, mix it up, and you've got a protein high or protein dense supplement. Next up we have fibre. So fibre, that's what we're saying there. The fibre is a nutrient that bridges this macro and micro gap. Yes, there is some kilocalories within fibre, but some of them we can't actually access. They're insoluble. So we consume them and eat them, but we can't extract the energy. So can we call them macronutrient if they're not giving us energy? Maybe not. But by doing that, it's so good for our gut health. So digesting fibres, which we can't actually break apart, they help fill out every other nutrient. They're almost the carriers. They're the boats which other nutrients can hop on and then pass through our body and then hop off wherever they need to in the intestines. Where can we get fibre from? Fruit, vegetables, grains. It's also very good and important for people trying to manage weight. We've got this thing called satiety or satiation, which is how satisfied you feel after eating a meal, how full up you feel for how long. And if you've consumed a lot of fibre, which you can't break down, you've got a lot of food stuff which sort of stays in your body. So your mind feels like it's full up. It doesn't need new food to come in. It suppresses the different chemicals and hormones that are released, which trigger those hungriness feelings. So by consuming lots of fibre, we're less likely to feel hungry, less likely to eat more food and consume more energy, and retain that energy in the form of fat, glycogen stores, i.e. putting on weight. And then micronutrients are vitamins, which are organic, which means they contain carbon, whereas minerals are inorganic. So organic, they're living. They are from or have been in a living thing, whereas minerals are inorganic. They come from dead things, basically like rock. And inside of the body, they play a huge role in balancing chemical reactions or enabling chemical reactions. They almost act as catalysts, is a good word. Where's that? Second point down. They act as the catalysts in chemical reactions. So if we do want a muscle to contract, for example, in order to actually get the nerve impulse to hit the muscle fibre that makes it contract, we require calcium to carry that message. So if we don't consume enough calcium, or we've lost it because it was dissolved in water and we've sweated, and we don't have enough calcium, suddenly our muscle control is disrupted. We start to get things like tremors, shakes, cramps, low force of contraction. The minerals, they help build structures. So they're the smaller building blocks. If protein can repair and grow muscle tissue and cells in the body, our minerals, they can help contribute to the rest of the structure, like our bones, our teeth, our hair. Where can we get them? Fruit, vegetables, eggs, many foods. Many foods contain a wide blend of macro and micronutrients. Now, vitamins and minerals especially are very common to supplement as well, particularly if people have intolerances to foods which are high in certain vitamins and minerals, or through dietary choice. If someone is vegan or vegetarian or pescatarian, if they've cut out a certain food group and they don't make up for that by consuming more of another food group, then they might need to supplement with some vitamins and minerals. Now, it's not ideal. The advice is to get it from a whole food source, but sometimes it might be necessary to help balance a diet. So that was the first point. We're looking at the macros and the micros inside the body. Now we're going to look at before, during, and after performance. So how can we time nutrition to our benefit? Well, first of all, nutrition isn't just an on-the-day thing. It's a round-the-clock task. For a high-quality performer wanting optimal performance, they need to be consuming way before the activity. They need to know how to top up their nutrition on the day, and then they know what to eat, when to eat, in order to recover from the exercise so they can go again the day after. So it's going to be different. Just by talking through that there, before, during, and after, the type of exercise can determine the best, or the quantities of meal, the quantities of nutrients, I should say, before, especially during, and then perhaps the blend after as well. So before performance, ideally over 2 hours. We don't want to be eating an hour, half an hour, 20 minutes before a sport performance. Why? Because digestion takes energy. And our body's going to be not flowing, it's going to be distributing. It's going to be distributing blood to our digestive system so that it can actually break down the food. It can distribute that around the body. It can fuel the excretion process, the digestion of the food that we've just consumed. And if we're doing all of that and then we start performing in a sport, there's going to be less energy, less blood flow, less focus on the muscles. Now, because of this delay, we can't really expect our body to have a meal on the morning of and fully break it down and distribute the nutrients to the muscles where there's shortfall, and then have it all ready to go by an 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock performance. So the nutrition before, that happens the days beforehand. We've loaded our body up with a blend, but ideally more complex carbohydrates. So those carbohydrates, remember, complex, there's more vitamins and minerals and nutrients contained within it, so there's less energy, but they're more complex, they're harder to break down, so we can access energy inside them for longer. So by making sure that our body has got a huge portion of carbohydrates stored inside of its muscles before we even start to exercise, we know that the fuel tanks are full. So large meals the day before, complex carbohydrate rich. We don't want to be doing too much exercise on that day either. We don't want to be depleting the stores before the main event. Now, during performance, if we know that complex carbohydrates take a long time to actually act, we don't want to be consuming those in game. We don't want to be consuming those during the performance. We want simple carbohydrates. This goes back to what I was saying, there's not really a good or a bad. They both have their benefits and drawbacks in different situations. So simple carbohydrates are great for on the day, mid-performance, especially that second point, for activities longer than 2 hours. Anything under 2 hours, we probably haven't depleted all of our stores. So you have to weigh up the pros and cons. If I consume any sort of food now, my digestive system is going to be working and drawing on the blood flow, drawing on the energy, the oxygen. So will I get any benefit from that? Or will the benefits outweigh the negatives to digesting what I've just eaten? Or do I hold off and I just deplete all of my muscle glycogen stores lower than I wanted to, but I don't waste any time or energy processing food that I've eaten? Okay, that's for activities shorter than 2 hours, especially for shorter than 1 hour. We shouldn't be supplementing our nutrition mid-performance if it's 30 minutes to an hour. We don't need it. Between 1 and 2 hours, then perhaps something tiny, something very accessible like a gel that this cyclist is consuming. A gel or a fluid, it's not too reliant on the digestive system to process. It's very quickly accessible. But for endurance sports lasting longer than 2 hours, then yes, we will need to consume something at some point to top up our muscle glycogen stores, get blood glucose levels a little bit higher. What we don't want to do is deplete those and then have to convert to fat stores, which requires more oxygen, which would require the performer to lessen or to reduce their intensity. And obviously throughout all of this, we do want hydration. After performance, how can a performer, when they've finished, what should they do to boost recovery or to accelerate recovery and get them back to tip-top shape so that they can train again the day after or in the days that follow? Ideally, ASAP. So give it 5 or 10 minutes, let their body sort of come down and recover, let it recover slightly, but then some form of food. Ideally, complex carbohydrate rich, and perhaps a little bit of simple carbohydrate just to hit the bloodstream straight away, rather than them feeling crashed out and tired. So a little bit of simple, a little bit of complex. Don't worry too much about the protein at the moment. That would come later. So the main aims of post-performance nutrition is to promote that recovery and to get it ready for the next activity session. The large, balanced, whole food meals, so this bowl down here, how nutrient dense that is. Lots of different food groups there: fruit, veg, meat, fish, pasta. That's going to happen later on. Okay, not too late, but not too soon. We want some form of food to go in first. So a little bit of a blend of simple and complex carbohydrates to just aid the recovery process straight away, get some of it back to the muscles, into the stores, and to keep some glucose flowing in the blood to allow normal bodily functions to occur. Then later on, high protein. High protein, get that muscle repair going. Carbohydrates, because that muscle repair is going to require energy. So we consume complex carbohydrates to fuel the protein synthesis, the muscle repair. We need excess carbohydrate to then, once the protein's done, to go on top of that and get distributed around the body to completely stock up the muscle glycogen stores. And then some fats. Because when the person has completely come down from their performance and they're at low intensity again, they don't want to be using too much of that carbohydrate to fuel protein synthesis. So get that fat in. So at low intensity, that low level, that slower rate, just in the background, supporting protein synthesis. And then, of course, frequent hydration. Keep that water coming in. So we've got this phrase called carbohydrate loading. And it's something a performer can do before performance to assist their levels of energy on the day. Now, 4 to 6 days prior to competition, intense exercise. Intense exercise. So be it the training, be it the practice, whatever it might be. We are forcing the body to deplete its glycogen stores that it currently has. And in doing that, it's forcing the enzymes which control and monitor the glucose levels of the body, it's forcing them to become activated. With less glycogen in the body, they're having to get switched on. They have to be more active, more attentive to the stores that there is, so that it uses them efficiently. 2 or 3 days prior to competition, we might start to reduce the intensity. We begin to reduce the exercise intensity, so there's less demand for accessing the glucose, and we start to increase our glycogen consumption. So we start to build in a wider diet. complex carbohydrate rich diet. And because there's no exercise using it, but we've got active enzymes that are looking for and are very protective over the glucose because there was a shortage of it a day or so ago. The glycogen that is consumed is held onto, it's distributed, and it's kept in the body. The enzymes are activated. And then 1 to 2 days prior, we completely stop exercising. We ramp up our diet, our intake of complex carbohydrates, so that then on competition day, we've got maxed out fuel stores and we've got raring to go enzymes. We've got them switched on and ready to put them to use because they were almost put in, they were put into a heightened state because there was so little glucose a few days ago. They had to become more efficient. So now, on the day of, they've got lots of glycogen and active enzymes. So when they do ramp up the intensity of their performance, they'll be able to access it at high rates for a long period of time. Which brings us to our last section on water and hydration and the different effects that it has. So water, it's an essential component of a balanced diet. It makes up between 60 and 70% of the body. Be it in the cells, be it in the blood, be it in the muscle, be it just beneath the skin, be it in the brain, be it in the organs. But it helps chemical reactions take place. It acts as the medium for things to happen. It being neutral as well, pH of roughly 7 to 8, it helps regulate the body's pH balance between acidity and alkaline. If a part of the body might fluctuate ever so slightly, we are talking decimal points here, but if there is some form of fluctuation, water can be drawn from somewhere in the body and put into that area or that space to help bring it back the other way. Now, during sport, a big thing is thermoregulation. As we metabolize foods and we release energy from them in order to move, we're going to create heat as a byproduct. And if our core body temperature goes a little bit too high, chemical reactions start to take place differently. Things react differently in different temperatures. So in order to keep our core body temperature level and safe for performance, we can lose heat with water, be it through water vapor coming out of the mouth, be it through sweating coming out of our sweat pores, and then others such as touching a surface, and heat conducts from our skin into the object. But with water, we have vapor, we have sweat. Now, obviously, looking at those the bottom points down there, what can influence the amount of sweating, the duration, the intensity, and the environmental temperature. So the longer we exercise, the longer we metabolize food to release energy at higher rates for longer durations in environments that are naturally warmer, sweating is going to be induced. We're going to sweat more. So water loss is going to be increased. And obviously, that point down there, clothing thickness, layers, or lack of technology can lead to sweat levels as well, but mainly intensity, duration, and the environment. So in order to offset this, to avoid dehydration from coming in, to maintain euhydration, which is our balance. Now, obviously, euhydration, if we are in a dehydrated state, euhydration can be achieved, but we just stay in that dehydrated state. So ideally, we want to be adequately hydrated, and then we maintain euhydration. Input matches output, but we're actually at the right level. We don't want that to be low, and then our input matches our output, because then we stay in this vicious cycle of dehydration. So we should aim to have about 12 glasses of water a day. It depends on the size of the person, depends on the level of activity, the intensity, the environment, the things that we just mentioned that influence sweating. But roughly speaking, 3 litres, about 3 litres of water a day. A little bit less if you're smaller and you don't exercise. A little bit more if you exercise more and you're bigger. But about 3 litres. If we don't have 3 litres, we're going to look at dehydration in a moment. But suddenly we're impaired. We can't sweat as much. We can't regulate our temperature as well. We can't get rid of toxins, be it through sweat or urine. So it's the medium through which so many things are done or are made. They're achievable because we have water in our body. So it's so important that we consume about 3 litres. Now in sport, we get through about 500 millilitres of water per hour. It's about a pint glass, or a larger bottle of, a drink. A typical Coke bottle or water bottle, one of those smaller ones, they're around the 400 to 500 millilitre mark. And we need to be consuming that regardless. And then if we are somewhere warmer, if we are moving with more intensity and we're metabolizing food at a greater rate, producing more heat in our body, then that could go up to 1,000 millilitres an hour, 2 pints of water every hour, just to maintain you hydration. If we drop below that, then that's when dehydration can set in. Now, with that water loss, yes, we're losing heat, which is a good thing. We're thermoregulating, maintaining a good core body temperature, which allows all chemical reactions to take place. But within that water, salts, electrolytes, vitamins, minerals, the things which are essential for enabling chemical reactions to occur, we're losing them. Now, they're stored in water. They're soluble. They're stored in the water inside of our body. So as we lose the water, we lose these vitamins and minerals as well. And in a position where we're exercising and we're demanding muscle contractions, heightened metabolism, quicker chemical reactions, we've got less vitamins and minerals to make these increased demands occur. That's when we start to get fatigue. That's when we start to get muscle malfunction. We can't access energy as well. Now, refer to what we were talking about before about the intensity of exercise and the nutrition during performance. And we said how below 1 hour, you won't really need to do much. And the same goes for hydration. If you're exercising an hour, as long as you're adequately hydrated at the start, a couple of sips throughout, that'll be okay. Between an hour and 2 hours, well, you could have lost about 2,000 millilitres of water, 3 or 4 pints of water. So you'll need to be constantly topping up with water. Now, during that time, you've probably lost quite a few salts, electrolytes, vitamins, and minerals. So towards the end of that 2-hour period, you might have lost so much that your performance is being inhibited, in which case, supplementing with sports drinks, some hypertonic sports drinks, with or a blend of electrolytes, vitamins, and minerals inside them, such as Gatorade, such as Lucozade. Supplementing with those between the 60-minute and the 120-minute mark, that could support performance. Beyond 2 hours, definitely. It's almost a must. Because the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth, depending on the duration and the intensity, the rate of loss, the functionality of muscles will be almost completely lost if there isn't some form of replacement. And these sports drinks are great for that. Depending on the duration, just looking at that last word there on the slide, potency. You can get ones hypotonic, which are lower in their blend, hypertonic, which are higher in their concentrations. So different sports drinks can suit different performers and different durations and different intensities. And if we do all of that, we can avoid dehydration. Because no one wants to be in a dehydrated state. You feel fatigued, you feel dizzy, headaches, confusion, especially in open environments where you have to be thinking about teammates, opponents, objects. Don't want confusion. Heart palpitations. We don't want issues with our cardiovascular system if we're trying to supply our working body with blood flow, with oxygen, so that it can remove CO2, deal with lactic acid production, deliver glucose. We don't want disrupted cardiovascular system. So we don't want water levels to drop because suddenly our blood will thicken, it will become more viscous. Because a large part of blood, I think it's about 70 to 80%, is made up of water. So when we sweat, some of that will be drawn from blood. So if you were to take out some of the water from blood, it will get thicker and thicker and thicker, it will get reduced down. So we've got less blood, thicker blood pressure is going to go up, blood flow is going to slow down. It's not going to be as effective as delivering things around the body. It can lead to, there you go, reduced capacity to deliver the oxygen and the nutrients. We can't lose heat as well. The less water we get in, or we have inside of our body, the harder the body works to retain it. So it lets the body temperature increase rather than lose any more water. And as soon as we've got that slower blood flow go into the brain, that can cause that confusion. That can cause that headache. It can cause that nausea and sickness. Which brings us to the end. So by now you should know the functions of macro and micronutrients. You should know how a performer or coach can structure nutrition before, during and after a performance, using that carbohydrate loading strategy as well. And then hydration. How we can maintain hydration with the sort of quantities and volumes, 500 to 1,000 milliliters per hour, because 60 to 70% of our body is water. Beyond an hour or two of exercise, we shouldn't just be topping up with water, we should be replacing those salts, electrolytes, vitamins, and minerals. And that is that. So I hope you found that lesson useful. Obviously go on and access the sheets, the revision videos, etc. that surround this, and I will see you in the next lesson. Bye for now.